I was pulling into my driveway after a long day at work when I noticed something unusual, a police cruiser parked by the community pond. My stomach sank. In Oakwood Heights, when the police showed up, it usually meant one thing: HOA president. Karen Petton had found yet another victim for her power trip. Got as I jogged toward the pond. I could already hear her voice, sharp, demanding, cutting through the peaceful afternoon air. There, sitting on his favorite bench with his fishing rod cast into the water, was Walter Garrison. At 78 years old, Walter had lived here longer than anyone. His quiet presence a constant in the neighborhood. Karen stood behind the officer, arms crossed triumphantly, her blonde bob bouncing with every gesture. She wore her usual crisp blazer and slacks, the HOA president badge pinned to her lapel like a badge of honor. It was clear she was relishing this moment, enforcing her rules on Walter. The officer, clearly uncomfortable, shifted his weight, trying to find the right words. But what happened next would change everything, costing the HOA over $2 million in property value. Let me take you back to how this all started. Walter moved to Oakwood Heights in 1992, back when the area was mostly farmland. The pond was a simple, peaceful spot, a local gem for anyone who needed a break from the grind. Walter's modest ranch house sat on 3 acres, with the pond marking the eastern boundary. For over 30 years, Walter had made his morning ritual a peaceful walk to the pond with his tackle box in hand, spending hours fishing alone. Then came Karen Petton, a newcomer with a mission. She bought a massive house on Hillrist Drive and quickly maneuvered her way onto the HOA board. Within a year, she was president. From day one, Karen set out to turn Oakwood Heights into what she called a premier residential community. It started with mailbox regulations, then landscaping requirements, and eventually, the approved paint color list that only allowed beige and gray. But the pond? That was her latest target. Karen declared it an HOA exclusive amenity, demanding access, permits, and a $50 monthly fee. The morning of the incident started like any other. Walter was down by the pond at 7 a.m., coffee in hand and tackle box at his side, enjoying the peace. Then Karen appeared marching down the gravel path in a power suit. She announced that, effective immediately, anyone who wanted to access the pond needed HOA approval and had to pay a permit fee. Walter simply smiled and kept fishing. That's when things escalated. According to my neighbor Janet, Karen stood behind Walter, reading from the HOA bylaws in a hostile tone. When Walter didn't respond, she threatened to have him trespassed. Still, he didn't budge. That's when Karen pulled out her phone and dialed 911. By the time I got there, half the neighborhood had gathered around. Everyone knew Walter, and more importantly, everyone was fed up with Karen's reign of terror. The officer, a young guy fresh out of the academy, was trying to mediate. He asked Walter if he lived in the neighborhood. Walter nodded, pointing to his house through the trees. The officer turned to Karen, asking her to explain the situation. Karen launched into a rehearsed speech about HOA regulations and property rights, waving a manila folder full of what she claimed were official documents proving the HOA owned the pond. But what happened next would send shockwaves through the entire neighborhood. The officer carefully examined the documents, his brow furrowing. Then he asked Walter if he had any documentation of his own. Without hesitation, Walter reached into his tackle box and pulled out a weathered envelope. Inside was a deed from 1992. The officer's face changed as he studied the papers. He made a phone call, and we all waited in tense silence. Karen tapped her foot impatiently, clearly confident that she would win this battle. 3 minutes later, the officer ended his call, his voice calm but firm. According to county records, he said, the pond and a 50-foot easement around it were never legally transferred to the HOA. A clerical error during the neighborhood's incorporation had left it under a public trust, with specific access rights tied to Walter's original deed. Not only was Walter allowed to fish there, but he might be the only resident with formally documented access. Karen's face went from smug to completely shocked. She sputtered, demanding to speak to the officer's supervisor, but it was too late. Word spread like wildfire through the crowd. People started pulling up the HOA's website, looking at the fees and fines the HOA had been collecting for the pond. Someone shouted, "Can we get our fees refunded?" Another asked about the HOA's authority to issue fines for pond violations. The questions came faster and faster. Karen had no answers. Within the hour, 2 county officials arrived to assess the situation. They confirmed what the officer had discovered, that HOA had no claim to the pond. Worse, the mistake had cost the community millions in property value. The lead county official, Patricia Holloway, issued a cease and desist order right there on the spot. The HOA was to immediately stop all enforcement actions and refund any fees collected. The county would also conduct a full audit of the HOA's property claims. Karen's humiliation was complete when Patricia required her to make a public statement. Standing there, by the pond with Walter still fishing in the background, Karen had to apologize for the misunderstanding. She announced that all pond access restrictions were lifted immediately. The crowd erupted in a mix of shock and satisfaction. Some people even applauded. Others turned to Walter, asking if they could join him fishing. But that was just the beginning. Later that evening, during an emergency HOA board meeting, 3 board members resigned on the spot, distancing themselves from Karen's reckless leadership. The remaining members voted to hire an attorney to assess the HOA's liabilities. The legal assessment was devastating. Not only did the HOA owe thousands in refunds, but the loss of control over the pond had cost the community over $2 million. In asset value, Karen's downfall only deepened as the news spread. She had tried to warn Karen months earlier about the easement issue, but Karen dismissed him with a wave. Walter's family had negotiated permanent fishing rights when the land was sold to developers in the 80s. But Karen, too focused on control, never took the time to listen. Then the local news picked up the story. The headline read, "HOA President Calls Cops on Elderly Veteran, Loses $2 million Asset." Walter, a Vietnam veteran, had been trying to warn Karen all along. He'd even offered her the county records, but she had dismissed him as just another old-timer. But when the truth came to light, the HOA was left holding the bag for her mistakes. The insurance company launched an investigation, and soon, Karen's real estate license came under review. The Attorney General's office got involved when residents filed complaints, accusing Karen of fraud. She had misrepresented HOA assets, even using the pond as collateral for a loan that didn't belong to the HOA. The final blow came at the community meeting the following week. Karen's fate was sealed when residents voted overwhelmingly to remove her from the board and pursue legal action against her personally. She fled the room, her face drained of color, knowing her career and reputation were over. This isn't just a story about power gone wrong. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of standing up for what's right. The HOA's downfall was swift, but the impact of Karen's actions will be felt for years to come.